An Oklahoma judge dismisses the reparations lawsuit filed by the last 3 known survivors of the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. The 3 had been locked in a years-long court battle against the city of Tulsa and other groups and officials over the opportunities taken from them when the city's Greenwood neighborhood was burned to the ground, killing hundreds and leaving thousands homeless. The city of Tulsa requested the lawsuit be dismissed with prejudice, noting in part, saying that simply being connected to a historical event does not provide a person with an unlimited rights to seek compensation from any project in any way related to that historical event. And apparently the judge agreed. Well, Damario Solomon-Simmons, he's the attorney representing the survivors, and he stood in the Historic Vernon A.M.E. church, the only standing Black-owned church structure from the riots. He says that he is not done fighting for justice so far.
We didn't expect this because last year, Judge Wall said we could move forward. And so when I had to make that phone call to my clients on a Friday night because I didn't want them to hear about it through the news the way I did. And the question was, how can this happen? She said we were moving forward. And we don't have a good decision, a good reason for that. Because as of today, as of this time, we have not seen a written order. It seems every time Black people seek justice in this community and this nation, the goalposts are moved. Because in May of last year, when she said we could move forward, and then in August of last year, when she wrote the order and kicked out some of our descendants in this great church, we felt like that was unjust, but we decided to move forward based on what she wrote. And we conformed our case bill to what she told us to do, basing it on property. And yet we're still kicked out. But the good news, it's not over. It's not over. It's not over. This is not a defeat. This is a hurdle. I grew up in a church like this. The battle's not won yet, but we're still on the battlefield. I can't sing, so I ain't gonna be waiting on that. So we will be moving forward with an appeal on this case to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Even in here in Oklahoma, we know we have a conservative Supreme Court, but we believe the law and the facts are so clear that any lawyer, any judge that's actually looking at the documents will say, hey, you can let these people into court. This is what the law requires. This is America. And when we do our appeal, we're going to appeal not only for our 3 survivors, but for those descendants who were kicked out before, and to bring this church, Vernon A.M.E., which is the only surviving structure from the massacre, to be put back into this case. And we're also calling upon, once again, the federal government, President Joe Biden, who came here 2 years ago. And he stood right across the street, and he acknowledged that the massacre was the worst race massacre in the history of this nation. He acknowledged that the pain, the destruction, the mayhem of 40 blocks being destroyed, planes dropping bombs, 12,000 people made homeless overnight. He acknowledged that and said there needs to be justice. So we're calling on President Joe Biden and the Department of Justice to come in and do a federal investigation of the massacre pursuant to the M.E.T. Act, Cold Case Act of 2007, reauthorized in 2016. that can be done today. And if the last week has shown us what Ryan Walters, the Secretary of Education, saying the massacre has nothing to do with race, race massacre has nothing to do with race, with a judge kicking us out on a late night Friday night without any real understanding of why at this point. And just recently, the mayor of this city, G.T. Bynum, saying that he's happy that this case was dismissed because he doesn't believe any Tulsans have gained from the massacre. It's not about what Tulsans gained, it's what people like Regina Goodwin's family and the descendants and survivors lost during the massacre.
Attorney and founder of Justice for Greenwood, Damario Solomon-Simmons, he's going to be joining us tomorrow to talk about what is next. All right, we're going to go to our panel now. I want to welcome Dr. Omayo Kongo-Dibinga, senior professional lecturer at School of International Service at American University in Washington, D.C., and former Georgia State Representative Renita Shannon out of Atlanta, and political analyst Brittany Lee Lewis joins us from New Jersey, where I am from. Hello, all of you. Good to see you. I want to start with you, Dr. Dibingo. I want to ask you, what is your takeaway from this decision by the court? This has been a battle that has been going on for so long, seemed to have a lot of meat on the bone to it, but legally the court said this just couldn't be done. What is your takeaway?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to hear, him say that, this is not over. He's been a guest on the show so many times and has educated us richly on this issue. But also we have to be mindful of the fact that there have been other cases across the world where people have received reparations right here in the United States alone. Rosewood in Florida, for example, or when you look at issues relating to the Holocaust in Canada, they've been doing some work as relates to indigenous communities there. We see California has come out with some recommendations. Places like Evanstown in Illinois have also been looking at this issue as well. Oklahoma has this MAGA mentality where in every way, shape, or form, they are trying to erase and dismiss and disrespect the history of what happened during this time. Just last week, I believe, the superintendent of Oklahoma's school districts was talking about how we can't talk about the Tulsa massacre as something relating to race. It's literally called the Tulsa race riots, but he's saying we can't talk about that because that's critical race theory, which is a whole nother conversation about what critical race theory actually is. But when I talk about this particular area of Oklahoma, this particular issue, in my book, Lies About Black People, this country has a history of trying to remove black people from their land. If they can't do it by violence, they will do it by legislation. And throughout history, there's always been this game of back and forth, or whatever effort doesn't work. So even the people who they couldn't fully removed from there, when you got into earlier years, the 60s and the 70s, the 80s, they had other policies to remove black people from their land. And so this is a back and forth that we constantly see with our people in this country. What happened here with this particular decision is the greatest and latest example of it. But this is a pattern. But I'm so glad we have lawyers like Damario and others who are not giving up, because our people, our elders, they deserve better than this.
And like you said, how can you tell the story of the riots without telling a story of the riots? It just doesn't make any sense. Renita, I want to bring you into this conversation. What's your takeaway from this decision? Because we are talking about telling a story without telling the story, and this will probably be erased more from history because of the fact that they did not get what they've wanted so far in court.
Well, my takeaway is that this is a truly shameful decision by the judge. There was absolutely no reason to toss this case out. As Dr. Dibingo said, we have seen periods in time where folks have been compensated by the U.S. government for poor treatment. So, for example, Japanese Americans who were compensated for being placed in internment camps. And so the Tulsa race riots, anybody who knows anything about the story knows that this area was demolished, mostly because it was a black, self-sufficient, well-to-do town that was completely operating completely self-sufficient, and there were white folks in the area that just didn't like it. And so with this ruling, what I see is the state of Oklahoma deciding that they are going to shirk their responsibility to make these families whole and make those who were impacted by the Tulsa massacre, they're shirking their responsibility to make them whole, and it really is distasteful. But this would be an easy layup for President Biden, for him to have the DOJ step in. The DOJ is there for exactly this. When you cannot fairly get justice from your local government, whether that be city, county, or state, that is when the DOJ is supposed to step in and sort of be a referee and also an enforcer of justice when you're not able to get justice. So I'm hoping the Biden administration is taking a look at this. I'm glad the attorney is going to appeal, but the DOJ really needs to step in and make Oklahoma do what is right.
Yeah, and that seems like the logical next step. And as I said, we are going to have a guest on tomorrow, the attorney, to talk about that. Hopefully he will get into that specific, and maybe there will be that follow-up. Brittany, I want to turn the conversation to you because, their legal argument in terms of the plaintiffs, they said that this was a nuisance. This was the same argument that was made in the opioid cases, and they won those cases. $1 billion of money, $1 billion have been given to states across the country. But now we come to this, which certainly it was a nuisance that a whole town was burned down and people died, right? 1,000 homes burned. What is your takeaway on this Oklahoma decision and what it means for the future of how we regard this place in history?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with some of the other statements that were made, right? And I think to your point, a nuisance, this was more than a nuisance, right? We're talking about an estimated 1.5 million in damages during that period, which was around 20 million today. So these individuals deserve to be compensated. And I mean, it's the city of Tulsa, it's the Chamber of Commerce, it's the state of Oklahoma. They've really treated the people of Greenwood and North Tulsa, along with the descendants of the Tulsa race massacre, as second-class citizens, really not worthy of respect, right? And the material that was taken away from them and that legacy. And it just amazes me how, organizations like the Justice for Greenwood Foundation, for example, are able to provide monies to the survivors, but the state refuses to, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the really horrible aspect of it. But I do, and I do want to draw us back to this point about what it means if we do, right? If they do decide to compensate. We know that the United States has, and I think it was mentioned a moment ago, the U.S. paid out $1.6 billion to more than 82,000 people of Japanese ancestry who were placed in the internment camps in World War II. So I would love for the DOJ to step in, because we know it's high time for the government to really put the money where their mouth is in more ways than one. But if they continue to compensate us for the harm that they have done to us, and this isn't just in Tulsa, because we know there's been massacres and there's descendants of those individuals who have been victims of these massacres in New Orleans in 1866, in St. Bernard Parish in 1868, in Wilmington in 1989. We could go on. Springfield.
That's right.
1919. Don't even get me started.
I think you're started.
We can keep talking about just how many times, and just in general, right? In enslavement, right? It opens up. If they really start compensating us, continue to compensate us, it's going to completely underpin the entire economic system, because we are literally owed so much for the tragedies and things that we have been through as a people.